Hiya and welcome to this week's episode of Inside Property Development, where I'm speaking with Esther Kurland from UDL, which stands for Urban Design London and also Urban Design Learning. So Esther's an ex-planner, absolute expert on planning and design, and this actually is my absolute favourite episode of all of the ones I've done so far. It's really super interesting. So good that we went on for pretty much 2 hours. So we're gonna split it in two, and this is part one. I'll see you on the inside, and do please remember to like, subscribe, comment if you've got anything to add. See you in there. Right, just a quick one. Whether you are a massively experienced and well-established property developer already, or maybe you're a new or aspiring one, either way, you will know that it is really not easy to find viable opportunities to come up with the best scheme, the best design that's going to maximise the land value and fully de-risk things for you, and then to go on to get the very best planning permissions as quickly as possible. However experienced you are, you will know that that is not an easy thing. I have put together a super detailed scorecard based on my 40 years experience in this industry, reverse engineering everything that I've learned, including lots and lots of mistakes over the years, and everything I've done to maintain, touch wood, 100% planning track record. I'm pretty sure there will be stuff that you don't know. Go and do that scorecard. Find out just how good or not your current process is, and I absolutely guarantee you will learn at least a little something, if not a ton. So it's bit.ly /MLA score, all in capitals. You can do the Millbank Land Academy scorecard. I absolutely guarantee you will find some interesting stuff, and it will help you get much better deals.
Hello, thanks Paul. Thanks for having me along.
Okay, so thanks a lot for coming. Usually, before I start these things, I ask you to do a little CV.
Oh, blimey. Okay.
Yeah,
do you want me to do that then?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm a planner by background. I did geography at university, and we ended up moving to a new house, which was in a new estate that was really rubbish. It was windy, it was soulless, it was too small to get a bed in the bedroom. There was so much wrong with it, and it made me interested in place design. It wasn't called that then, so I moved over to do planning and then urban design at university, and then worked as a planning officer in local authorities for 10 years. Then at the GLA on the first London plan, did the built environment chapter of that, tall buildings, views, heritage, density, etc. Then I went to work at CABE and led on their design work, things like how to use design and access statements, design appeal, things like that I did there. And then 20 years ago, I was seconded over to UDL, which is a not-for-profit organisation to support local authority people who are involved in the built environment, whether they're councillors or officers, to offer them training, support, networking, advice. And I've been doing that for 20 years now. Can't believe that many years actually how it's gone. We started off just supporting the London authorities, but now we have members from across the country, and we run about 100 odd events, live events a year, and do lots of other types of support as well.
One of the reasons for doing this is because I'm really into good design, or try to be anyway, and the reason I started my property development training business over 10 years ago was because I really wanted to encourage other developers to really focus on design and do good stuff, because there's been a lot of crap development over the years which I really don't like, and it actually gets us all a bad name. So the first big sort of designy organisation I'm going to say that I really remember in a big way was CABE. Was there much before that?
There was the Royal Fine Arts Commission before CABE, but it did design review, but it didn't do as much. And there was a real revolution in sort of turn of the century with the Urban Renaissance report and the compact city approach. And I think it started with I might get it wrong. Apologies if my memory is wrong. Was it John Gummer who did the report into planning in towns and cities? And that sort of led into when it was the new a Labour government from 1997 onwards, they really got involved with place design and place quality, and they set up CABE.
Do you want to just explain what that is?
So CABE was the Commission for Architecture and Built Environment. Yep. And I joined it when there were 20 people there. John Rouse was the chief exec. He was absolutely amazing. I learned so much. It was like the most inspirational place to go to work. It was like an academy of people who had been frustrated because place design hadn't been on the agenda. And all of a sudden, there was this organisation that was allowed to do things. It was so refreshing. So it was things like, at that point in time, we had in the planning world, we had lots of PPGs and then they became PPSs. So there was one on housing, one on green belt, whatever it is. And they had design stuff in them all over the place. So one of the first things that we did when I started there was do something called Design at a Glance, which was literally take the policies out of all these 20 different documents and put them on one little concertina booklet that you could put in a pocket.
I had it.
You had it?
Yeah.
Okay. So that took 2 weeks and £2,000. And that's what CABE was like then. It was just like you saw a need and you did it. It was revolutionary. And all of a sudden there was the support from government, there was a bit of funding, there was energy, and then there was need. Because we'd moved from a time when the PPG, if you remember the PPG one that said design is not a planning issue, and if local authorities refuse schemes on design terms, they will be awarded costs against them. That was the national policy up until the sort of late 1990s, turn of the century. So, nobody could do anything on place design. It was about 11 years, I think. I think it was got rid of by the government that came in 2011. It had swollen a lot by then. It was big. It was a bit more clunky, maybe. It had achieved a massive amount, but it also got got problems. It wasn't like this way or that way.
I must admit, I around that time was involved in some quite big schemes. We also had to go to design review things with CABE and stuff like that. They were a big pain in the arse, to be quite honest.
Well, I'd left by 2005 because I looked at the work programme and thought, I've not got much to add to this. This isn't for me. So I'd gone on secondment to set up work on UDL. Yeah. And I thought I'd be going back to CABE, but it didn't ever suggest to me that I wanted to go back. There wasn't, that work programme hadn't got the energy it had in its early days. Yeah. So I stayed at UDL because I thought I could do more good there. And UDL is hosted by Transport for London. So I was very involved at that time with the GLA, TfL, LDA, London Development Agency, and even the HCO, which was the other part of the mayoral organisations. And that was really interesting with the first couple of London plans, particularly the implementation of that first London plan. There was so much going on where that Urban Renaissance report, ideas of compact city were really being delivered. So it was fascinating seeing what London was doing up until after the Olympics. It's been a little bit different story, I think, since 2013, 14. Money hasn't been the same. Yeah. It achieved so much, so it got harder and harder to keep achieving, to be honest, and different challenges. CABE kind of has now gone. Then we had the Office of Place for a little bit, and that's gone now. Yeah. So I don't know what you think we should have next. I don't know.
Obviously, what you're doing at UDL is fantastic because every place is different. I personally think local authorities really need to have the sort of knowledge and help that you give them in-house there, rather than some big organisation sort of making decisions and forcing stuff on people. I mean, no one knows their local area better than the local planners and the local people. That's what I think. But as long as the local authorities have got the sort of knowledge and the resources to sort of know what they're doing, really. What do you think?
Well, they don't. They don't at the moment. Of those 20 years, this is the worst. The year, I think, our contact with all these different local authorities, planning authorities, is probably the hardest year ever.
This year?
This year. Their finances, their staffing, their resources, I think is the worst it's been. That's my perception. I might be wrong, but that's what I'm hearing. We have about 75, 76 local authority members, so we talk to across the country, all of the London ones and then the other non-33 ones outside London. They're really struggling. So there's so much challenge with housing targets, with finances, with viability, with a churn in the planning system. We seem to have been going through planning reform forever.
Yeah.
It will settle down now, I think, but we're still not there until we've got the National Development Management Policies, new style local plans, the National Design Guide and Code published, etc., Manual for Streets, which is meant to be coming out. So there's still a lot of new stuff. We've had massive challenges with the building safety requirements. That in the cities with tall buildings, that has just kind of schemes at the moment, and again it will settle, but right now it's in not good. And then biodiversity net gain also put a lot of new strain into the system. So there's so much people in local authorities need to learn. At the same time that there's less of them, they're hemorrhaging people who've been there a long time with that institutional knowledge. They maybe not work, they're more remote working, so maybe they're not picking up so much from team members as well. So there's an isolation, there's a lack of confidence. People go into planning in the public sector because they want to make a difference. They don't do it for money because they won't get it. They're going to get grief, and they know they're going to get grief, but they really believe that they can do something better. They probably... I'm rambling a bit here, Paul. Stop me if I want to, but I think there's kind of two groups of planners. There's one that thinks planning exists to facilitate more growth, and there's one that thinks planning exists to manage development in the public good. And it used to be that those two things were joined together, but it feels like they've been separated to a certain extent, and you have teams within planning who believe one of those two things is the most important or the only important thing they're doing. So, you know, the public good, if you take growth out of it, whether it's about neighbourliness, it's about environmental custodianship, it's about inclusion, it's whatever, you know, it's that kind of public good. It's saying the development of land is managed to the benefit of everybody who's affected by that land and what happens on it, which I think is kind of the basis of the planning system. But then over time we've had more the economic development, regeneration side of planning, which is planning as a vehicle to identify sites for development and make sure they get delivered. So you've got these two kind of concepts which are rubbing up against each other more and more, I think.
This is super interesting. I've got to tell you, and it's actually one of my sort of pet issues or subjects, yeah? The way it seems to me, the whole reason for doing this, as you know, is to get more understanding and collaboration out there in terms of planners understanding developers, developers understanding planners, and, you know, all of the other people that are involved in the process as well. So for me, from a developer's point of view, this is my 40th year doing this, right? Starting off doing really small stuff years and years ago. Planning, it seemed to me, had been quite anti-development, and the general... It almost felt like they thought their job was to stop you doing stuff, right? And that's why, you know, for a very long time, it was the Development Control Department. Yeah, it's only relatively recently people have started calling themselves Development Management. Seriously, I think that says it all to me, yeah? And that sort of ties in with what you just said about the different things they're sort of focusing on. Now, planning in general, I think certainly high level, you know, central government has been more pro-development than it's ever been. Yeah. So it seemed to me for a long time planning was largely felt quite anti-development. Yeah. Now, in theory, it's actually generally quite pro-development, but of course, the system is now just at a time when the system is massively under-resourced. Interestingly, stuff is increasingly unviable.
Well, that's the other bit to it. That's the third thing, which planning, kind of like the basis of planning. You've got management, development, public good, facilitate growth, and then you've got make money. Tax development to pay for things. And that changed massively from, you know, in this century in terms of social housing, affordable housing, or subsidised housing, whatever words you want to use. So the concept that more and more we expect development of housing to fund subsidised housing for those in need, which obviously we need, but the link specifically to individual development projects, as well as all the other Section 106 requirements and other things which are now mentioned building safety and BNG, which are putting cost onto planning, onto development. It's kind of like it has also been seen as a cash cow to pay for things that are needed. Because if you go back from when you were starting off, planning gain was literally paying for the road that serves your site, and it was only things which were specifically relevant to that site, wasn't it? And now it's kind of like Section 106, we need all these things, and the viability has just blown out the water unless you can build in a way that doesn't deliver those public goods. So we've got this circle of these three things which are pulling in different directions. They're not. I don't think anyone is really looking at the interplay between them in a systematic way to make sure it's balanced so it can deliver. Yeah. And that's what I think we see over and over again is they're pulling apart, and maybe one triumphs in one scheme, but it's such a battle to get there that a lot of the time everything falls apart. That scheme falls over.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I've got someone very interesting geared up for a future podcast, and they are like experts in land value capture, which you will know all about. And I was with them the other day, and we were having a little bit of a chat about it, all the rest of it. I actually don't think anyone should be able to own land at all. That's how alternative hippie I am, right? Land's worth what it's worth. People own it. People control it. You've got existing use values. That is just how it is. Now, there's been numerous attempts to capture land value over the years via various development land taxes, as you know, and pretty much every time they've happened in the past, usually it's the Labour Party putting them on. Everyone sits on their land, no one sells, and then they wait for the Tories to get back in. They take it off, and then it all starts again, right? Now, very cleverly, actually, what's happened over the years is more and more, let's just call them stealth taxes, have been added to land, right? Affordable housing, massively important. When I first started, there was no affordable housing policy. It was just coming out. I'm going to say Circular 694. Is that right? Do you remember?
I don't remember that.
Okay.
I'll take your word for it.
It
sounds about right. It sounds about right.
Yeah. So there wasn't any affordable housing policy.
It wasn't called that then, though.
What would it have been first called?
I think it would have been called social housing or subsidised housing.
So this is terrible. I actually did my dissertation, believe it or not, on looking into the impacts of affordable. I'm sure it was affordable.
Maybe it was affordable.
I'm going to have to.
Oh yeah, but look,
I should
I just never quite understand that, because it means that the other housing is unaffordable, which is true, but it's not a good bit of marketing.
If this was a proper podcast with an assistant, I could ask them to Google it for me. we haven't got that, so we'll Google it and we'll find out. I'm pretty sure it was 694, the circular. Yeah. I'm pretty sure it was originally they started calling it affordable housing, but who knows? Might be wrong, right? But didn't exist. Should do, obviously. No one's arguing it's really important, massively important. Affordable housing policy, and this is meant to be a bit educational, so what I'm talking about now, I know you know this, but this is for people out there that need to know this, that don't get how it all really works, because people thinking, well, it's just greedy developers making fortunes, that's just really not going to help, right? So it's important that people understand how it works. Years ago, there wasn't any affordable housing policy in terms of private developers and land having to provide it. It was all built by councils, right, largely. Affordable housing requirements increased, quite rightly, right, as need increased and all the rest of it. But of course, that can be a big cost on the value of the land. The grant or the value that you got for the affordable housing massively decreased.
Absolutely.
This is all happening over slowly over time.
Was that 2011 or something like that?
Something like that. Something like that. You then, of course, get more Section 106 requirements, additional contributions required for all sorts of other things. And I'm not saying any of this isn't important or shouldn't be required, just trying to get people that don't know to understand the whole viability issue. Then, of course, you got Community Infrastructure Levy, really designed to replace Section 106. It didn't replace it, so you've now ended up with both. So that is really pure land tax. And now, more recently, you've got things like BNG, nutrient neutrality, water neutrality, a whole load of other stuff that developments got to pay for, right? And of course, the issue is, And then, of course, build costs, development costs probably gone up 30-40% over the last 5 years, right? So the result of that is we're now in a situation, and this has been increasingly getting this way, where the system, let's just call it, trying to squeeze more and more and more value out of the land to pay for stuff, right? And it's got to the point whereby, well, it just isn't viable. You know, land values are getting pushed, you know, below or at existing use values. So landowners just won't sell. It just doesn't make any sense. They might as well just leave the land doing whatever it's doing at the moment. But and on top of that, of course, developers still want to build, right? And it's getting increasingly difficult, and has been for years. But we still just want to do what we do and build houses for people. And what ends up happening there is developers end up getting forced to cut their margins, and development's risky enough anyway, right? Without doing it on cut margins. And basically what happens is, if the market goes up and therefore end values go up,
that's all right.
They might get an all right margin, and they get some out of the shit, and they survive, and they might make a few quid until the market goes flat or down, and then they all go bust and disappear. You know, I was talking to someone about this the other day, about viability and stuff like that, and I know it was someone a little bit more on the sort of public sector, or didn't really understand it side, and they were just sort of saying, well, that's just tough luck then, isn't it? And I'm like, well, but then no one gets any housing, and all the, you know, we've got. Well, actually, this leads us quite nicely onto good design and SME developers, right? I actually think smaller developers build the best stuff. Major house builders, nothing wrong with them. I used to work for them. Some are better than others, but they've got a very specific model, right? It is the smaller developers, the ones we really, really, really need, that are the ones that get squeezed by the most by all of this. So unless all of this gets like recognised and addressed, all that happens is things that we're going to get even less housing, just at a time when development planning policy is trying to be pro-development, and we need it more than ever. I've waffled on massively.
No,
so
I totally agree with you. It's like a perfect storm, isn't it?
It is. It really is.
And then what happens on the politics side is, because of those margins being squeezed and squeezed and squeezed, kind of the densities are pushed up. And to a certain extent, in some areas, the quality does come down as well, the build quality and the design quality, which are slightly different things. And then the schemes become less palatable for the local community. And then we sort of talking before we started recording about councillors, and then it becomes very difficult on that side, because, you know, there's kind of a belief that you can ever increase density, and as long as it's well designed, whatever that might mean, it's fine. Well, I haven't seen that. There's a ceiling beyond which it is very difficult to create good places unless you put so much money into the maintenance and the management and the servicing, and ensure, and actually, to be honest, the people living there have a lot of money to spend on their lifestyles. Very high density social housing, affordable housing, or for higher occupancy, and it's not luxury kind of stuff where people have got a weekend cottage in another part of the world or something like that. You know, it is really hard to get the livability, the sustainability, and the neighbourliness of those schemes at very high densities. People don't like them. They don't like living in them, or they don't like living near them. And the other concept which is into this with growth is the idea that you can piggyback off existing facilities and services. And this makes your argument doubly correct, because you can't afford to put in more services and facilities. So, there's already something there. So we don't really look to see whether there's a capacity or not, particularly, say a small park or some playground or whatever it happens to be. We probably look at capacity with education and health because they're dealt with separately, but anything else is kind of it exists, we can put more people to use it, and therefore that's good, so we're densifying, but we don't really have a concept of what a suitable carrying capacity in terms of a gross density for that area should be. We just kind of go, every single site, just max it out to make it viable so we get homes. And you can understand why, absolutely. But I worry that that's not that's not going to be good in the long term. We're probably building problems for our children and our grandchildren, to be honest. I don't know what the answer to it is. It's kind of, maybe it's all sort of mature Western capitalist societies are going through something similar, and there isn't the bagginess in the economy to be able to pay for what we need to be doing. So we're trying to get it off developers, or trying to piggyback off existing resources or services. So it's quite a complex kind of package that is then stymising planning, because those problems cause kickback socially, which is part of, I know the government's like going to have a central system of delegation, so it's going to take some decisions away from, or a lot of decisions away from local councillors, but there's still going to be political ramifications from this. So yeah, I don't know if that kind of builds on what you're saying, Paul.
It does, and it's really interesting, isn't it? 20 years ago, there weren't really that many tall buildings in London, certainly not residential, right? So this whole issue, and particularly green belt policy, effectively putting a stranglehold on things, has forced, or did force, higher densities. It's really interesting, you talked about PPGs earlier. So PPG3 was really the big one that sort of first kicked it off in terms of higher densities and stuff like that. And you'll remember, you could actually get refused for not being dense enough. Do you remember that?
Oh, God, yeah, because before PPG3, there was minimum car parking spaces and maximum densities, and then it turned it round to maximum car parking, which was a fantastic change in policy. But, like in the London situation, we then had the SRQ, the Sustainable Residential Quality Matrix in the London plan, which was setting targets for net site densities based which were different locations, to kind of the character of the area, roughly suburban, inner, whatever.
The P-TAL matrix.
And the P-TAL with public transport accessibility levels, which were basically, can you get onto the system? It didn't matter how far you could get or how much it cost or whether you had any local facilities. So there's relationship between, let's have higher densities where you can get onto a public transport system, kind of was embedded into the psyche of planning in London at that point. That was the first London plan.
I actually thought that was fairly sensible, didn't you?
But it was based, absolutely, but it was based on research of, I think it was, from memory, about 100 schemes were assessed to see what were they good enough in terms of quality. If they met the quality standards that were used, I think it might have been Building for Life. Someone else would know, like Patrick Clark, who I think did it. And then what density did they achieve when they were meeting quality standards? So that was where the ranges were set. What happened afterwards was the planning system, as far as I could see anyway, the planning system became more and more housing target driven. And hang on a minute, if we count up the number of sites we've got, we times them by the middle of, let's say, of these ranges, we don't meet the housing target. So we better bump the ranges up. And then the ranges were bumped up, and then they were bumped up, and then they were bumped up. And that's because the targets are not capacity driven, they are market driven, the housing targets. And so eventually, in the last London plan, the matrix was removed because research had shown that, again, apologies if I got it exactly right, wrong figure, but it was about 75% of the schemes approved were not within the ranges. So there's no point in having a matrix which is not being applied. So most of them were above. Some were below, but most of them were above the ranges, even though the ranges have been bumped up and bumped up. No one really looked to see whether the quality of those places was still being delivered. That was kind of like just lost in the ether.
You say that, and I'm not saying you're wrong, but in terms of the whole quality thing, maybe wrongly, from a developer's point of view, is, oh well, that's quite good, because you will remember this. I remember for so many years it was like literally planning by numbers, right? Lots of this was driven by the Essex Design Guide, which I think has got a lot to answer for, not good in a lot of ways, where the number of schemes I can tell you about that got refused, or you couldn't make them work because you didn't have 21 metres back to back. You were 20.9, and literally the scheme would get booted out for 100 mil, or density policy said 100 habitable rooms an acre or something like that, and you were 101. I mean, it was just literally crazy planning by numbers. So I actually liked the density matrix thing because what that said to me is like it takes away a lot of the silly arguments or reasons you got refused as a developer, right? Still, obviously, it's got to be good design and all the rest of it, but they sort of couldn't hit you with the easy refusal. Oh, you're too dense. That's how it seemed to me. Well, that's what I liked about it anyway. Obviously, it's still got to be good design, and if it wasn't, they would still quite rightly refuse you for good design. So, do you not think that was sort of fairly well covered? And cable were around then as well.
Yeah.
So,
well, from UDL's side, we did a lot of events on what should the last London plan say about density and tall buildings and stuff and quality. And from those events, there was like 300-400 people involved in them and whatever. It kind of came out that...
What type of people, just out of interest?
Oh, well, mainly our side, as it were, the local authorities, because that's who we talk to, who our members are. But there were others there as well. And it was very much, well, we can't use a matrix we can't keep a matrix we're not using, but what can we do other than that? And so the concept of density as an output from design rather than an input from design was sort of discussed, and actually that kind of went into the current London plan in terms of if you're clear on what you want to achieve in terms of quality outputs, then you can, if your design is informed by those, then it will reach an appropriate density for the site. And those qualitative outputs are things like natural lighting levels, privacy levels. And then there's another level of qualities which are about how around the areas around the development and between the buildings, whether they're shared spaces or communal or public work. Again, are they getting light levels or whatever? But the policies were very much then kind of, just make it work without setting performance thresholds to these things. But it's actually the performance thresholds which could then be delivered in different ways. So you mentioned the 21 metre back-to-back distances, which is about, we assume, nobody really knows. I mean, David Birkbeck makes jokes about it being the nipple test.
It does come from
the nipple test. The nipple test. So it's about, if you take, that's the distance that by which you can't see a human nipple is 21 metres or something like that. Therefore, windows need to be that far apart, so if you look at one and someone's undressing another, they've got privacy. Kind of like, does everyone who applies that policy know what it's for? No, because the policy doesn't actually say that is what it's for. Now, if the policy says we want a certain level of visual privacy to bedrooms, so you can't be overlooked in your bedroom or your toilet, then you can check that. You can do that, as we know from good designs, in other ways with angled bedrooms, offsetting, etc., etc. But if planning policies don't say what they're trying to achieve in terms of the qualities, visual privacy, another one being natural light levels and ventilation, so we end up with a policy about dual aspect units. It's not the fact they're dual aspect that matters, it's the fact that they have got natural light into the bits that people need natural light, and also that there's the opportunity for cross ventilation. Now, the ventilation you can do with mechanical ventilation depending on the site, again, if people understand that's what the policy is about. And that's why when you have this enhanced aspect, which is let's have a bay window or two windows that, it doesn't really help very much because it doesn't get the light into the unit and it doesn't allow movement of air. So actually a policy that says we want these minimum light levels within these living spaces, kitchen, living room probably being the main ones, then that's a totally different way of checking whether the quality of those homes are right. Now, a lot of those home comforts are actually covered by the building regs, but some of them aren't. And so I think that's the conversations which are useful as saying, well, should planning policy use proxies like dual aspect or 21 metres or a density range, or should it be clearer in setting what the performance standards are for the things that matter? And then it's up to the designers to make sure that they are delivered. In the past, that's very difficult for planners to check because we hadn't had the systems that we have now, which could actually monitor at the planning application stage whether the scheme is going to deliver those things. But that's moving forward. So I think there is the potential for planning policy to be much better in the future, where it is much clearer, and there is a golden thread through what is the objective that we're trying to meet? Visual privacy being one example of it. What are the forms that deliver visual privacy? Lots of different ones. That's up to you. But we're going to check that you're meeting the visual privacy rather than saying you have to do it this way, which is the 21 metres. So that's kind of, that's where I hope this goes. But if you actually do that, you probably, if you set good enough standards, that may bring down the densities from where we've got at the moment, because the dual aspect thing always bugs me with this, is the way it works is the developer goes, oh, we've managed to get 50% of homes to have dual aspect. And then it was 40%, and now we've gone 50%. We've done much better. And the local authorities go, we've negotiated an improvement on that. Yay. Well, the other 50% of homes, people living in it, there's nothing. There's nothing to say what's the minimum light levels in their homes, because that development is tested on just the percentage which maybe you're okay, and it says nothing about the other ones. So actually having something, because if you live in one of the ones that doesn't have any natural light, doesn't have dual aspect, no one cares, no one's looked at that, and it doesn't matter to you that someone else has got a better flat, basically. It's not helping you very much. So actually saying all of them have got to have a minimum level of lighting is, it probably, from where we are now, it would bring down the densities of some of them, which is probably why, because I think we're building a lot of slums, basically, in some of the schemes that see the highest densities. That will be pushed back against, because now we've got into that cycle you were talking about before, about viability, where it's assumed you can do these things, and that's feed through into all the pricing. So I think we're in a potentially a good place where we can move planning policy to be more clear and more there's more clarity, certainty, but also opportunity to meet objectives in different ways. But also at the same time, I think the viability side of it now, we've accepted so much that I don't know if we can pull back, because we've already, what's the stats at the moment? 2/3 of London boroughs had no starts in the last quarter, something like that.
It's even more than that.
Is it even more now? Yeah. The GLA were quoting it. I mean, it's absolutely appalling. And a lot of that's down to the building safety thing. But that's a standard that's come in without testing its impact on viability. No one, when it was set.
Management and monitoring of that is not, again, something else that's not been properly resourced.
No.
And interestingly, and this is a thing that honestly, again, is one of the other reasons for doing this. So this is one part of the thing that really, I'm trying not to say gets on my tits.
You can if you want to.
But it does.
You can't see them if you're 21 metres away.
Very
so
good,
all right.
very good. But whoever comes up with some of these policies, obviously not talking to the people, i.e. developers, that have to make them work. Because very often, if they just did and they understood, look, do you realise, obviously there are idiot arsehole developers out there, right? Of course there are, right? One, I'm trying to help get rid of them. No one wants that, right? But honestly, in my experience, the vast majority of them, certainly way better than they used to be in the olden days, they do want to do the right thing, right? And it is a really, really hard job. If the policymakers talk to the people trying to do it and understand the implications, and things would be a lot easier.
It certainly would. And we did a couple of UDL events on the building safety, to understand how to deal with the building safety requirements, the current ones. Last one was about 6 weeks ago or something like that, 2 months ago. And we had one of the speakers, I think, knew a lot, and I believe, maybe wrong, was involved in the creation of the current requirements. And I did ask the question, did anyone check what the requirements are? So if anyone doesn't know what we're talking about here, this is to have multiple stairs and lifts within tall buildings over 6 stories, 18 metres, and that they're all sort of hermetically sealed, so they don't link through basements, and that you come down one of them, you can get out to the street, and then you can go back in from the street to another one. So did anyone check that? That works for the fire issue, but did anyone think about what it does for the amount of the building that is used it can make money versus the gross to net internal use, also what it does to the ground floors of those buildings, what it does to people trying to kind of safety wise, if you're bringing your bin bag down and you have to go out to the pavement, round a building and in another door to get to the bin store, etc., what it does to big schemes which have got multiple connected basements. So this is why things are not getting built, because those ramifications of that is you end up with fatter buildings, bigger, fatter buildings, which have townscape issues and often, might not work on some of the sites that have been identified for development, as well as causing other problems for other design objectives.
Yeah.
And that just doesn't feel like it has been tested out. Hopefully somebody at some point will do that and will find a sweet spot that works better for all the objectives. I mean, obviously after Grenfell, no one wants to see anything like that happen ever, anything at all. But, actually understand, were there options other than what we've got now, which would have been easier to design and deliver? I think you're absolutely right. I haven't seen any evidence that those conversations if they've happened, if they've led to anything.
You mentioned bins.
Oh,
talk to you about bins at some point. Remind me to come back to bins.
Okay. That's a David thing, isn't it?
As you mentioned.
Bin spikes. Bin spikes.
Well, I've got to tell you, so people that I talk to and train, the amount of schemes that get refused and booted out because of bins and bikes.
Going back to where we're talking about the London plan losing the density matrix, that causes a problem for people doing their SHLA, their if I always get it wrong, Strategic Housing Land Availability Assessment. I hope I got that one right.
You did, very good.
Hey, dyslexia doesn't help when you've got all these acronyms. Because, as I said, it's a useful thing. You know what the rough density is, you know the number of sites, you add them up. Oh, hey, presto, we've got enough or we haven't. So there's a feeling to bring something back, but really feeling like what I was saying about the carrying capacity of a neighbourhood cope with growth, but also to understand that you need a certain density of people to get the facilities into a neighbourhood to work. So a lot of the opportunities now in London particularly, but elsewhere in the country as well, is about suburbs. Suburbs, generally speaking, they're all very different, but generally speaking, they're dormitories. They were designed and built for people to sleep in and go and live their lives somewhere else. So they don't tend to have massively good local facilities. If you can make them more able to have local stuff, so that living local is an option, then you are not reliant on very expensive travel infrastructure to increase densities. So we kind of came up from UDL with something called the multi-timed place or multi-timed city approach, which talks about the needs that should be in a place at the home circle, neighbourhood and city civic life levels. And the home circle is kind of having facilities that support you in your home or just outside your home to be able to do things well there, and then shared with a few neighbours, your neighbour spaces, which, their whole idea is if you share some spaces with some people, you don't need quite so much private space, so you can increase densities a little bit that way. And then, of course, your neighbourhood facilities as well, which, this is an antidote. Multi-timed place is an antidote to the 15-minute city concept. And you still need to be able to get to things maybe not less often, which maybe are an hour away or something like that. So things which are in a home circle you're using every day, not as many people use each one, but they're using them all the time. Civic life, a long way away. Millions of people might use that theatre, but they maybe do it once a year or twice a year. That's the concept of catchment areas. So the multi-time city approach, you could start to use that to understand what is an optimum neighbourhood gross density with these facilities in it, so that you can actually start to look at existing places and say, well, their gross density at the moment is there, and that kind of people are car dependent.
Tell me how you're calculating gross density.
There's a concept at the moment, so it would probably be habitable rooms per hectare, I would have thought. And it's going to be obviously lower than a site net density because it's counting all the hectares that are not got habitable rooms on them, but which have got things on people in those habitable rooms need. So you're actually taking that into account. So if you say your gross neighbourhood density is X, but actually it could work very well as Y, how do we get it to Y in terms of has it got the right facilities within it yet so far, or can we increase those? if it hasn't? And can we then use that why to then look at the individual sites to understand their role of each individual site and their site net density to upping the overall gross density of that neighbourhood and its carrying capacity? I'm probably not explaining this very well, but it kind of feels like it's potentially a different way of doing a density matrix, where instead of set site densities, you have gross neighbourhood densities within the matrix. And again, you can still add up how much of each neighbourhood type you've got, which accessibility level you've got to get your SHLA. But then you can also look at how you move neighbourhoods up the graph through proactive planning.
Yeah, I think I get it, and I like it in theory.
It's a theory.
But now coming back to this, like as someone trying to find sites and do deals and knowing the practicalities, I'm literally at the opposite end of the scale.
Yeah.
Like trying to persuade a landowner to sell me their land and get a deal to stack up. If you got a site that could be a very big area where you could build a few good 100 homes, or it could be a single plot. Yeah, and there's obviously a big range between those. So obviously, if it's a really big scheme that you could sort of make it mixed use, I can probably guess. But tell me, what are some of these things you need locally?
If you think for your own home and your own life, if you share with your neighbours some garden space, play space, you do parking spaces, maybe gym spaces or spaces for activity where your deliveries are going, and then you move beyond that to kind of whether you've got some live work, some co-working spaces which can be flexible. You've got your community centre which has got used for the nursery, and then the yoga, and then the God knows what else. So it's nothing that you wouldn't be used to using, but if you have more things near your home, you have less need to travel. You reduce the amount of travel, and it's expensive travel in terms of infrastructure and actually doing it. You're more likely to be active travel. So if you've got a particular site, I mean, I haven't thought this out in.
No, it's good. That's what we're talking about. It's interesting.
But if you've got individual sites, really what this is about is knowing that site is within that neighbourhood at that moment. That neighbourhood through this work, because we've got all the data now. Is this neighbourhood density? It's got all these different facilities already. They're not up at capacity, so you can do a higher density scheme probably on that site, which is comfortable for that neighbourhood, and it can carry it. For another site in another neighbourhood, or maybe it's a bigger site, I don't know, where it doesn't have all these facilities, and it's maybe already at where at the top end of what it should have. What it was. Bit research is needed to be done to work out what the range would be for that neighbourhood. You'd think, well, actually, this site is only really going to be viable if infrastructure, if there's money going into infrastructure, which is going to improve that neighbourhood. If that happens, and there's enough sites in that neighbourhood to support that happening, or it's big infrastructure, say, then you might have a different view about what you can get on that site. So you can, nothing happens, say you can go and get a bit on that site. If investment goes in, you understand that site as part of an invested in neighbourhood is going up that graph, up that matrix, and you can get more on it. This is not new. This is not new in terms of how transport planning is looked at. You invest in that area, you build more in that area. But it's kind of, we need a method that works for established areas, not just opportunity areas and big schemes, because all we've had with suburbs is Superbia and the Croydon stuff, which is basically just densify isolated car-dependent areas without changing their character in terms of what they make available to change suburban living to being more local living. So that we don't, we're not built. I mean, if you just say, fine, just build more in suburbia and people can just have more cars or just stay at home more and they don't have anything to do or anywhere to go, fine, that's great. But personally, I don't think that's a good way. And that's why politically, like Croydon, there's massive kickback, because you're just saying, we're just going to put more people here, but we're not going to do anything else, basically. That isn't a very good story. We're going to bring more people in, and those more people are going to ensure that you're going to get all these new things. That's a better story.
Let's use that as an example. So Croydon's a good example, right? There was a time when I'm going to say Croydon was probably the most pro-development local authority in London, ish, right? And and they had a really quite good, useful design guide.
The small sites one.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think it was quite good anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway, but of course, what happened then is because of the viability issue, right? And I mean, this is another really big important subject, right? Trigger level for affordable housing's 10 units pretty much everywhere in
so
London.
you've got 9 everywhere.
Yeah, so you've got lots of, couple of semis or houses or bungalows with big gardens got knocked down and someone built a 9-unit block of flats, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of them were really, really, really bad.
But that's happening all over. It's not just in Croydon, actually.
Yeah. But there was loads in Croydon because of the small sites policy and all the rest of it, right? Changed, and all of a sudden that was put to stop,
Exactly.
and it went from probably one of the... I've got to be a bit careful here, actually, because I've got a little site in Croydon.
It's very different now. Croydon Council's doing really well now.
Yeah. Well,
some great people there.
Mine's going to be... It's a very nice one, as always. But they went from very easy to very difficult, right? And I'm not saying... I mean, look, I agree. A lot of those 9-unit blocks of flats, a lot of them were diabolical, right? But... So just putting that to one side, everywhere, like the Metroland in particular, I know out your way and my last site where we met and stuff like that, loads of 1930s interwar semis, which are absolutely ripe for densification, but they're all in separate little ownerships. So unless someone does something major with compulsory purchase, and which I can't see that happening, and like selling big chunks of land that we're going to take your house off you, and then create a really well designed, let's call it neighbourhood scheme. Problem with the smaller sites. Now, if you've got a great big site, you can do it because you've got enough land to have all the mixed uses,
So what I'm trying to say with this neighbourhood approach is whether or not those schemes, some of them are well designed in terms of they look good or they didn't, they were still all taking 2 homes away and putting 9 homes with lots of parking and bins. Yeah. Basically. They didn't really kind of concept of what is it people like about their neighbourhood and their suburb, and the greenery, the outlooks, that side of it. They didn't take that into account at all. It was just like, just put more people in here. That's what it's about. That's why I think if some of those neighbourhoods, politically, if some of those neighbourhoods had something done to their parades, if some of them had some greening of the streets, if there's something that is improving, that is making the neighbourhood work better, function better as a neighbourhood, as well as bringing people in, then there is a conversation to be had locally with the yin and the yang of it. But it wasn't. It was just bring more people in. And that's why we need some form of planning approach which allows us to look comprehensively at neighbourhoods, about planning them for the future so they densify, but in a way that will improve them and not just bring people in. And to do that, you need to know how they're working now and what they've got in them, and have a concept of what they should have in them and how many people you need in them to make those things work. So and again, you've still got the problem of who's going to sell their land, but you've got a long-term vision for that neighbourhood, which you can have a conversation about, which we haven't. We've been doing it with, neighbourhood planning's done it a little bit, not much. It's probably impossible. Paul, to be honest, it's probably impossible, but it's worth thinking about because the alternative isn't great. If we can't understand how we can deal with neighbourhoods and gross densities and the facilities that are needed at different distances from people's homes and how we can provide them, we're not going to get anywhere with densifying large parts of, this 1.5 million homes is going to end up, most of it being on greenfield. Because we're just not going to be supporting small builders. We're not going to be delivering small sites because the political backlash will be bad. But also, to be honest, the physical, the outcome is going to be, not great in terms of health and society and climate and etc. Just densifying suburbs by putting more people in them is not the answer, I don't think. It is the answer for an individual site to make it viable, but it's not the answer for planning. And that's the divide that we're sitting opposite each other. But we're talking about, we actually want to achieve the same things. We want to find ways to do that.
Thanks for tuning in to Inside Property Development. Please remember to like and subscribe. Do join us every week where we'll be speaking to house builders, developers, experts, planners and everyone involved in trying to get more much needed housing created the right way. We'll learn together how we can collaborate rather than fight, and by working together we can all help create better places, spaces and homes and a much more beautiful world.